The letter had been in her coat pocket for 11 days before she answered it. She had read it twice the morning it arrived. Once standing at the window of the boarding house in Duluth, where the light came in flat and gray off the lake, and once at the table with her coffee going cold beside her. Then she had folded it back along its original creases and put it in her coat pocket and gone about her day. She cooked for the family she was staying with. She mended. She listened to the sound of the harbor and did not think about the letter, which meant she thought about it almost constantly. The man who had written it was a carpenter in a town called Mallow Creek in the eastern part of Montana Territory. He had placed a notice in the Norwegian language paper that's circulated through the Lutheran parishes in the upper Midwest. He was looking for a woman to manage his household. The wage was honest. A room was provided. He had written that his daughter was 4 years old and that the previous housekeeper had left in the spring to marry a man in Billings, and that he was not a difficult man to work for, which was either true or the most common lie a man in his position told. He had not used many words. The letter was half a page, and there was no flattery in it, just the facts of the situation and what it required. She had answered on the 11th day because she had run out of reasons not to. The train into Mallow Creek came in on a Thursday afternoon, when the sky was the color of pewter, and the first suggestion of autumn was in the way the cottonwoods along the ridge held themselves stiff and waiting. She was not the last one off, but nearly. A family in front of her moved quickly down the platform steps, the father with 2 cases, the mother with a child on her hip and another pulling at her sleeve. She let them go and then stepped down with her bag and stood at the edge of the platform and looked at the town. It was smaller than she had pictured. One main street, a mercantile, a post office with peeling paint on the upper trim, a barber shop, a hotel with 4 windows on the second floor. At the far north end, she could make out the clean smell of fresh-cut lumber before she could see its source, which meant the workshop was either near the road or the wind was carrying it. She put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the letter there, soft at the fold now, almost worn through. She knew no one in this town. She had no family left in Minnesota, and the last connection she had to any place was the boarding house in Duluth, which was not a connection so much as a delay. She picked up her bag and went to find him. The mercantile was the obvious first stop. A woman behind the counter looked up when she pushed through the door, the bell above it ringing once. She was somewhere past 60, with a measuring quality in her eyes that was not unkind. "Help you?" she said. "I'm looking for the carpenter, his workshop." She paused. "I've come about the position." The woman, whose name she would later learn was Margit Solon, set down the bolt of cotton she'd been folding. "Ezra," she said, "his shop's at the north end, past the water trough, set back from the road. Big door, always open." She looked at her a moment longer. "You'll smell the pine before you see it." She had already. She thanked the woman and went back out into the cooling air. She smelled it before she saw the building. Pine shavings and something underneath, beeswax and linseed oil, the smell of wood handled with attention. The shop was a wide, low building with double doors standing open to the street. She stopped at the entrance the way she might stop at the edge of a river before crossing. He was at the back, bent over a workbench, running a hand plane along the edge of a board. She could see the motion of it from where she stood, smooth, deliberate, the curling shaving lifting and falling away from the blade. He did not hear her over the sound of the work or the sound of the wind through the open door, and she did not call out. She waited. When he straightened and turned to set the plane on the bench beside him, he saw her. He was somewhere in his late 30s. Tall and built the way men are built when their work involves their whole body, and they have done that work for many years. His hair was dark and cut short, and there was sawdust in it. He looked at her the way she had expected, the way everyone looked at a stranger who appeared without announcement. But underneath the assessment there was something else. Recognition, maybe, not of her, but of the fact of her. He came toward her and stopped a few feet away and looked at her directly. "You came," he said. 2 words. She had ridden 2 days and 1 night for 2 words, and somehow they were the correct ones. Not warm, not formal, just the acknowledgement of something that had been uncertain until this moment. "I came," she said. He looked at the bag on her arm briefly. Then he looked back at her face. "I have to finish this join before I can leave," he said. "It'll be 20 minutes, maybe 30. "I'll wait," she said. He nodded and went back to the bench. She set her bag down just inside the doorway and stayed where she was and watched him work. There was a precision in it that was also a kind of patience. He did not hurry. He tested the join by pressing the two pieces of wood together and running a finger along the seam, then lifted the plane again and took one more pass and tested it again. Whatever it was going to become, a drawer front, a cabinet door, she could not tell yet. She watched his hands. They went where they needed to go without apparent thought. At some point, a child appeared from behind a partition at the back of the shop. Small girl with dark braids and sawdust on her dress, who stopped when she saw the woman in the doorway and stared at her with the direct, unself-conscious scrutiny that belongs to 4-year-olds. The woman did not crouch down or use the kind of voice people use for children they are trying to impress. She looked at the girl and nodded once, the way you'd greet someone you might see again. The girl looked back, decided something, and went to stand near her father's workbench without saying anything. 20 minutes, he had said. It was closer to 30, but she did not mind. She had waited in worse places for less reason. The house was a 10-minute walk from the shop, along the north edge of town, and then up a short rise. He had told her this when they finally left, walking beside her with his toolbox in one hand and the girl's hand in the other. The girl had taken his hand without being asked, the way children do when the world has added something unfamiliar to it. The house was small and solid. 2 stories, freshly repaired siding on the south wall, a porch with a straight railing. The window frames had been recently painted. She noticed this. A man who painted window frames was a man who intended to stay. He opened the door and set his toolbox on the floor, and the girl went past him and disappeared somewhere inside. He lit the lamp on the table nearest the door. In the light, the room looked larger than it had from outside. Kitchen and a sitting room sharing the same space. A cast iron stove, a table with 3 chairs, a shelf of books above the stove. Curtains on the windows, white, clean. Someone had kept this house before her, and they had kept it well. "The room is through there," he said, indicating a door to the left. "It has a window. The girl sleeps above, in the loft. I'm in the back." She nodded. "There's leftover soup I can warm," he said. "If you're hungry." "I am," she said. "Thank you." He moved to the stove without ceremony. She set her bag inside the door of the room he had indicated and stood there a moment looking. A bed, a washstand, a hook on the wall, a window with a view of the ridge, everything plain and clean. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat on the surface the way she always did when she was learning a place, taking its measure through her palms. The soup was potato and salt pork, and it was good. He ate standing at the counter because the girl had taken the chair nearest the stove and was occupied with something, a piece of wood with shapes scratched into it, a toy of some kind, and he did not move her. She ate at the table and did not fill the silence with talk. When the girl finished her examination of the wooden toy, she looked up and said, "What's your name?" she told her. The girl repeated it, 1 syllable at a time, trying the weight of it. Then she went back to the toy. Her father said nothing. After supper, he washed the bowls at the basin and set them on the shelf without being asked where they went, which meant he knew his own kitchen, which she appreciated. "The stove runs warm in the morning," he said. "I bank it at night, but it comes up quick when you open the draft." "I'll remember," she said. He looked at her a moment. He did not seem to be assessing her exactly. He seemed to be doing what she was doing, learning the shape of this situation, trying to understand what it was going to require. "I'm usually at the shop by first light," he said. "The girl sleeps until the shop sounds start." A pause. "She knows not to go past the porch without someone." "I understand," she said. He nodded and said goodnight and went to the back of the house. She stayed at the table a few minutes longer in the way she often did after other people had gone to sleep, sitting with the quiet. The lamp was still going. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind had dropped, and the first suggestion of stars had appeared in the window glass. She pressed her hands flat on the table once more, then got up and put out the lamp and went to her room. She slept without difficulty, which surprised her somewhat. New houses did not always agree with her. This one did. In the morning, she came down to find the stove already going, and a pot of oats on the back plate kept warm but not quite hot. He had been up for some time. She could hear the shop from the kitchen window, not loudly, the occasional tap of a hammer, the complaint of a saw. She poured herself coffee from the pot he had left and stood at the window and watched the light on the ridge. The girl came down the loft ladder barefoot and stood in the kitchen in her nightgown, looking at the pot of oats with the expression of someone who has seen that pot many mornings and holds no strong feelings about it. He makes it every day, the girl said. Even Sunday. Does he? She said. Does he puts too much salt? She looked at the girl. The girl looked back. She found a cloth and wrapped the handle of the pot and tasted the oats. The girl was correct about the salt. She added a small amount of dried apple from the tin on the shelf and stirred it in. The girl watched all of this without comment. When the bowl was set in front of her, she ate it without commentary, which was, she was coming to understand, a form of approval in this house. She settled into the shape of the place over the following weeks, the way water settles into a new channel, finding the level without announcement. She learned that he took his coffee before he went to the shop and did not want conversation with it. She learned that the girl would eat almost anything if it did not touch another thing on the plate. She learned the particular sound the floorboard made outside the back room when he was heading to the kitchen before sunrise, and she learned to listen for it without meaning to. She did not know yet what he made of her. He was courteous. He was not cold. He paid her at the end of each week exactly what he had offered in the letter, counting the coins into her hand with the same care he brought to everything. But he did not offer himself up for examination, and she did not ask. One afternoon, she was at the table, hemming a dress the girl had grown into the previous season and had grown out of before anyone had a chance to let it down. She was working by the window, the light coming in low and gold the way it did in the hours before supper. She heard him come in earlier than usual. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. She did not look up from the work. "There's a goods wagon coming through on Friday," he said, "from Elkhorn. If you need anything for the kitchen, you should give me a list before Thursday." "All right," she said. He was quiet a moment. She kept her eyes on the needle and the hem. "The girl needs winter boots," he said then. "Her feet have gone up a size since spring." Another pause, shorter this time. "You'd know better than I would what size to order." She looked up at that. He was still in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame. He was not looking at her. He was looking at some middle point between the window and the stove. "I'll measure her tonight," she said. He nodded once and went back out. She looked at the hem in her hands for a moment. She had not been asked for her judgment on anything in this house yet. Not directly. She set the dress down and smoothed the fabric over her knee and told herself that this was not a thing that required thought. Children's feet grew. Boots needed ordering. She knew how to measure a foot. That was all. She measured the girl after supper, kneeling on the kitchen floor while the girl stood on a piece of paper and held still with the determined concentration of a child performing an important task. "Is it going to hurt?" the girl asked. "No," she said. I'm just drawing around your foot. You're very close to the floor," the girl said. "I am," she said. "I'm very tall," the girl said. "You are," she said. She wrote the measurement on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen shelf where he would see it in the morning. The boots arrived the following week, a size larger than she had measured, because he had known what she had not, that by the time winter arrived in earnest, the girl would need the room. She laced them up that first morning and watched the girl walk back and forth across the kitchen floor, testing the feel of them. "They're big," the girl said. "You'll grow," she said. The girl considered this. "Will you be here when I do?" She did not answer right away. She tied off the second lace and sat back on her heels. "Yes," she said. "I expect so." The girl walked away satisfied, her new boots solid on the floor. She stayed kneeling a moment on the kitchen floor after the girl had gone. The house was quiet except for the stove and the distant sound of the shop. She pressed her palms flat against the boards and thought about the word she had just said, how it had come out before she reached for it, how it had been simply there. She got up and went back to the stove. The first time he asked for her opinion on something other than the household was a Tuesday in late October. He had come in mid-morning, earlier than usual, and set a piece of wood on the kitchen table. She was peeling potatoes at the counter, and she looked over at it. It was a carved piece, a small one, a bird of some kind with its wings folded, not finished, the surface still rough in places, the beak not yet defined. "For the girl," he said. "Her birthday is in December." She dried her hands and came to look at it. She turned it in her fingers, feeling where the wood had been worked and where it hadn't. She likes the magpies, she said. The ones that come to the fence post in the morning. She watches them. He looked at her. She talks to them, she added. I don't think she knows I notice. He took the piece of wood back without saying anything and looked at it. She went back to the potatoes. A few minutes later, she heard him go out again and the sound of the shop door. That evening, after the girl was in bed, she was at the table with her sewing when he came in from the shop later than usual. He set something on the shelf above the stove where the lamp would catch it in the morning. She did not look at it directly, but later, after he had gone to bed and the house was quiet, she went to the stove for a cup of water and looked. He had worked the tail feathers. The bird was unmistakably a magpie now. The long tail, the particular set of the wing. The girl would know it immediately. She stood there in the low lamplight and held the small carved bird in both hands. Outside, the first frost was on the roof, and the ridge had gone black against the early stars, and the house was the warmest thing in her world for some distance in every direction. She put the bird back where he had left it. She was careful to set it at the same angle, the same small degree of tilt. November came in cold and stayed. The girl had started calling her by name sometime in October, without fanfare, the way children adopt things once they have decided. She noticed this and did not remark on it. He had continued to call her nothing at all, or rather, he had continued to speak to her directly and without preamble, which in this house amounted to the same thing. She had learned by now the shape of his days. First light to the shop, home for the midday meal if the work allowed it, back to the shop until the light went. Supper, the girl's bath, 1 hour with a book or the farmer's almanac at the table, then bed. He moved through these hours without complaint and without particular enjoyment. A man doing what was required and finding in that a kind of steadiness. One evening she had looked up from her mending and found him watching her from behind his book, not with anything she could have named. He looked back at the book immediately. She looked back at her mending. She understood that this was not a house built for sentiment, but she had come to believe, slowly and without announcing it to herself, that it was a house built for something. She was still learning. What? Margit Solon from the mercantile stopped her one afternoon when she was coming back from the post office. Margit was a woman who moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had lived in one place long enough to understand it completely. He was not this way before, Margit said without preamble. After his wife, he got very quiet. She looked at the older woman. He is still quiet, Margit said, but it's a different kind now. She did not know what to do with this. She thanked Margit and went home. That evening, she made a supper of salt pork and fried potatoes and a pan of cornbread, and the girl ate without complaint, and he had 2 helpings of the cornbread, which was not his habit. She noticed without appearing to notice. She washed the plates at the basin and listened to him, read to the girl from the book they were working through, a chapter at a time, about a boy who finds a hawk in a field and nurses it back to health. The girl asked twice whether the hawk would be all right. He said both times that she would have to wait and see. But do you know? The girl pressed. I know, he said, but you'll like it better if you find out yourself. The girl accepted this. She had, in the time since she arrived, come to trust his word on things, which struck her as one of the more reliable measures of a person's character. She dried the last plate and put it on the shelf and went to the table with her sewing and did not think about what Margit had said. She did not think about it deliberately, the way you choose not to look at something that is too close to be seen clearly yet. The snow came on a Saturday in late November. She heard it before she saw it, the particular muffled quality of the air when the valley had closed itself off from the rest of the world. She dressed in the dark and went down to find the stove already banked up and the coffee made. Through the window she could see his tracks going from the house to the shop, already half covered, which meant he had been out there a while before the snow came heavy. She made oats and added the dried apple and a small amount of maple sugar she had bought at the mercantile the week before without saying why. She had not used it yet. She used it this morning without particularly deciding to. The girl came down and ate without taking her eyes from the window. It's really coming, the girl said. It is, she said. Last year it snowed to the top of the porch rail, the girl said. He took me up on his shoulders so I could touch it. She looked at the girl. Can you do that? The girl asked. Probably not, she said. I'm not as tall. The girl seemed to find this answer reasonable rather than disappointing. She went back to the oats. He came in mid-morning, stamping snow from his boots at the door, his coat covered in it. He poured coffee and stood at the counter and looked at the girl at the window and then at her at the stove. I'll need to get to the lumber yard before the road closes, he said. I should go now. I know, she said. He looked at her then, not the brief, assessing look he sometimes gave her, but something that stayed a moment longer than was necessary for the purpose of conversation. She was at the stove and she did not turn around fully, but she felt it. There's an extra quilt in the chest in the hall, he said, in case the stove drops overnight. I'll find it, she said. He set the cup in the basin and went out. She stood at the stove after the door had closed. The girl had gone to the window again, tracking his progress across the yard through the falling snow. The shop door opened and closed. He always checks 3 times to make sure the wood's dry, the girl said, even when it is. She looked at the girl's profile in the window light, the dark braids, the serious expression. Does he? She said. He says it's better to know than to assume, the girl said. She thought about this for a moment. I don't always know what that means. It means he pays attention, she said, to things that matter. The girl seemed to accept this and went back to watching the snow. She turned back to the stove. The maple sugar smell was still in the kitchen from the oats, faint and sweet. The snow came against the window glass. She stood there a moment and let herself be still. Later, after the girl had been put to bed and the house was quiet, she was at the table with her mending when he came in from the shop. He was later than usual. She had left the lamp going on the chance that he had not yet eaten. He stopped when he saw her still up, not in a way that said he was displeased, more the way a person stops when something they had braced for being different turns out to be as they had hoped. He washed his hands at the basin. She had set a plate to the back of the stove where it would stay warm. She did not say anything about it. He found it without asking and sat down and ate. She kept her eyes on her work. The needle went in and out of the hem. After a time he said, The Aldermean family came by the shop today. She did not know the Aldermean family. She had seen the name on a deed notice in the post window once. They're building a house on the south parcel, he said. The wife was asking after you. She looked up. She's looking for someone to take in sewing, he said. I told her you might have time, depending on what, she said. He looked at his plate. On whether you wanted to. She looked at him for a moment. He had his fork held loosely and was not eating, just holding it. I'd have to know more about the work, she said. I told her that, he said. I told her you'd let her know. A pause. I gave her this address. She looked at him steadily. He looked back. You gave her this address, she said. Yes, he said. Brief, quiet. It seemed simpler. She held his gaze another moment. He did not look away, and he did not explain himself further, and she found that she did not need him to. I'll call on her tomorrow, she said. He nodded and looked back at his plate and resumed eating. She looked back at her mending, the needle in and out, the thread pulling through. Outside, the snow had quieted sometime in the last hour, and the world was simply white now, still and even. She was aware of the lamp between them on the table, the particular small circle of light it made. She reached the end of the seam and knotted off the thread and bit it clean. She set the finished hem down and reached into the sewing basket for the next thing, and her hand found, under the flat of the folded fabric on top, something she had not put there. She did not move for a moment. She reached in and brought it out. It was a small piece of polished wood, smooth as river stone, shaped without obvious purpose into something that fit exactly in the palm of her hand. Not a toy, not a tool, just a shape, worked to the point where nothing more was needed. Pale wood, with a grain that ran in long, clean lines, and on one side, pressed so lightly, she had to angle it toward the lamp to see the outline of a branch with a single bird perched on it. She sat with it in her hand and did not say anything. He was still at his plate. He had not turned around. She was certain he knew exactly what her hand had found. She looked at the small shape in her palm. The bird was the same posture as the magpie in the carved toy he had made for the girl, the same folded wing, the same particular tilt of the head. But this one was hers. That was clear in the way it had been placed. Not on the shelf, not in a visible place. but in the basket where her hands went when no one was watching. He had put it there at some point during the day, while she was at the post office or at the mercantile. He had come into the house and put it in the basket without announcement and gone back to the shop. She set it on the table beside her. She picked up the next piece of mending and found the starting place and put the needle in. He finished his supper and brought his plate to the basin. He did not look at the table. He did not look at the small shape of wood sitting beside her sewing. He poured a half cup of coffee from the pot and stood at the counter for a moment in the way he did at the end of a long day, not quite ready to end it. "The step on the north side of the porch is going soft," he said. "I noticed," she said. "I'll get to it when the ground's stable." "All right," she said. He drank the rest of the coffee and set the cup in the basin and said goodnight and went toward the back of the house. She heard the door close. She heard the quiet that followed. She sat at the table for a long time after that with the lamplight on her work and the small carved shape of wood beside her hand. The house settled around her the way a house does in cold weather. Small sounds from the roof, from the floor, from the walls contracting around the warmth inside. She had lived in enough places to know the difference between a house that tolerated you and a house that included you. She knew which kind this was. She did not look toward the window. She did not look at the shelf or the stove or the door to the back room. She looked at her work and let the needle go where it needed to go, even and sure, and she let the weight of the thing sit beside her hand without examining it any further tonight. She would examine it tomorrow, or she wouldn't. It would still be there either way. Outside, the snow was finished, and the valley was white, and the stars had come back out over the ridge in the particular dense way they came after a storm, as if the storm had cleared something in the sky that was usually in the way. The shop at the far end of the yard stood dark. The house was the only lit thing she could see from where she sat. She took the carved piece of wood and set it in the basket under her hand where she would find it in the morning without looking. Then she folded her work and turned down the lamp and went to bed, and she did not lie awake.